Well, it's really my pleasure to speak to you. I'm at this point sort of an old timer of Jewish renewal. I still remember things from before the Holocaust when I grew up in Vienna. And I'm in love with God and with America. So here I am. And people want to talk about God, and I say, oh, wake me up in the middle of the night. Here I am.
Don't forget to mention your name. I'd like you to.
Oh, yes, my name is Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi. And if you want to hang a doctorate on it, I'd earned it.
Very good, sir. Thank you. Reb Zalman, you were ordained in a conservative branch of Judaism, the Lubavitcher Hasidim, and yet
Yeah.
you are well known for your explorations of other religions. Why did you take that path?
Well, first of all, I want to say that this conversation that we are having is being quality controlled, right? How so? Because God is also listening in. And when you have a sense that you think that religion should serve God, not that God should have to serve religion. And then it gets to a place that God is more important, and then you get to the place where someone like me has great curiosity, so that I often say I'm a spiritual peeping Tom. I want to see how people get it on with God. And therefore, I look past the fence to see how that happens.
Not everybody shares your omnivorous curiosity.
That's right, because they feel, how would I say it? They feel that they have a tradition and they have to live up with a tradition, and they don't ask, where is the tradition coming from? In what is it rooted? What is that first experiential thing that makes me ask, first of all, why is there a something and not a nothing? Secondly, what is the purpose of my existence? And then, when I see this seriously, then I want to say, I want to serve the purpose of my existence. And that's much bigger than Judaism, Christianity, Islam. All these are, how would I say, tools, if you will, spiritual tools. And it depends a great deal in which ethnic and biological entity you belong to, because it has cultural details with it that make it easier for you. It speaks the language that you're used to.
So there is something that will always be sort of embracing, like home, about your original religious tradition.
That's right. So this morning I followed all the rituals of the morning service and so on. But remember, these were the means, the tools for me to be able to log on to the internet.
Pardon me. That was
That's fine.
that was kind of a punchline.
I chuckled too.
Reb Zalman, let's get right to the big question.
Yeah.
Why are people religious?
You see, when you ask the question in the middle of a person being in the shopping mall mentality, they'll say, am I interested in that? I'm not interested in that. I just want to find out should I go shopping today that I can stretch my dollar further. But when I'm not in the shopping mall mentality, when I go to that place of the basic thought that I have about why do I exist and so on, then something else starts coming up. And I really want to, deep in my soul, there is something, I call it theotropic, just the same way as a sunflower is heliotropic. It turns by itself to the sun. So there is that longing that we have for that which is greater than our ego. And I think that's where it begins. And if someone is in touch with that, then usually they can make it past the confines of their tradition and love the tradition at the same time.
Is there a way to point people to that? People who are
Yes,
not in touch.
and that begins with asking them to go inside rather than outside. You see, a long time we were thinking that God is up there, out there. And there was a Bishop Robinson who wrote a wonderful book about that and pointed out that that's a foolish way of thinking. And then I go to, what's the root of my awareness? What's the root of my consciousness? Who makes my heart beat? What sits so deep, is immanent in me, and urges me to live? So I can't find this so much on the outside as I can find it much easier on the inside. And it's already in the Islamic tradition that God is closer to you than the vein in your neck. That's a very wonderful statement, but I would want to go into the heart for that.
When you speak of the inside,
Yeah.
should that word be in quotes?
Yes, because it doesn't mean space, right? We are not talking spatially right now. We are talking about a level of a vibratory level that is deeper than the one that deals with the periphery. You know, when I turn my consciousness to the source of my consciousness, that's what I mean more with the inner. And when I turn my consciousness to how I best drive from here to there, that is the outer. So I don't mean space.
When I look around me, I see a factual world of material objects, artifacts, organisms, the earth, the sky. What would lead me to believe that there was anything else, anything divine or spiritual?
A sunset or a sunrise out in the open. You see, there is nothing that helps that moment or that brings that moment into focus as being amazed. Remember how in the 60s we used to say, far out, out of sight. And that sense of appreciation that comes from the immediate impact of the reality out there, which is not a socially constructed reality, but one that meets me with an immediacy, how Mother Earth speaks to me, life speaks to me. That's different.
The Catholic historian Scott Appleby at Notre Dame describes religion this way. He says, religion is a response to reality perceived as sacred. And the Islamic scholar Tariq Ramadan wrote a couple of months ago in the New York Times, the world has meaning. Facts are signs. What is this perception of the sacred, this apprehension of the world as a meaningful organization of signs pointing to the divine?
You see what you're doing, the way you raise the question takes me away from the possibility of the astonishment, the amazement. It takes me right into the conceptual world. You know, Professor Heschel was the person who on our side spoke about the astonishment that comes, the amazement that comes from meeting the sacred. But something about the sacred, you know, one of our teachers points out when God said to Moses, take the shoes off your feet, you're standing on holy ground. The Hebrew language is very elastic, and it can also mean take habits off, take the lock that has you locked into habit off, and then you'll be able to see the sacred. When we have a habitual thing, it then looks at anything in terms of utility. You know, I see the geese on the lawn eating grass, and I say, how many people could feed on them? Well, that's not how I'm going to get to the sacred, right?
But you spoke, for example, of the impact that one feels from a beautiful sunset.
Yes.
Is it possible to talk about that at all without destroying that sense of astonishment?
Yes, and that's the reason why you use another form of language. When the philosopher talks, he talks in denotative language, precision, precise, and the object of thought is out there. When a poet talks, he talks in connotative language and uses metaphors, and when a mystic wants to talk, he just, how would I say, he stutters about it because no single word will contain what his heart and his soul knows at that moment, what his intuition is in touch with. And so that's really the problem of which language is being used. And that's why I'm saying the sunset and the sunrise and hearing the birds sing at that time, that is not something that I can approach with the left brain intellect. You know, in all those radio stations and other, there were interviews with a woman who wrote this book about the stroke she had on the left brain. And being a neuroscientist, she was able to make sure to understand what was going on when she was in the right brain part. And that, by the way, our schooling has not only not developed, it has repressed. But could you imagine if a professor, a teacher, gives a unit about something and then says, and now I want you to daydream about that. If they would say that, then we would be able to look at the same thing that we just learned about, let's say in geography, and dream that we are there, we are walking in that place, and so on. So then affect would have a connection with it. And the other part that is so underdeveloped at this point in our lives would get richer. And I'm trying to say something, that poetry is still a good language.
Do you, well, I was going to ask you if you had any favorite poetry that illustrated this, but let me ask another one of these sort of more objective, denotative questions. It's a puzzle, isn't it? You speak of affect, you speak of intuition, and yet the desire to share these inspirations with others in a community is also very strong. How do we get this? How do we get this stuff from the inside into a place that's sufficiently outside that we can share it together?
I think that's a wonderful question. And I want to tell you, what we do is we sing together. You know, people are now drumming together. That's such a wonderful thing, because the ego gets out of the way, the rhythm takes over, and there is as close as you can get to telepathy, not in terms of getting information, but in terms of feeling together, you know? So right now, we don't have good people in sociology who are doing transpersonal sociology, which is the sociology of people who are together in a devotional way. But if you have attended sometimes, whether it is a Hasidic davening or a monastery where people are chanting to God about 4 o'clock in the morning, and then you get another sense of when you're with zikr, with Muslims, or you're doing mantras together with a group, then what happens is that you set aside the critic and you allow the heart to open, and you're moving out of the I feeling into the we feeling. And I think that's why we want groups, because, how would I say, it just reinforces and satisfies something very deep. We don't want to be disconnected. We want to be connected with one another. I'm talking to you right now, John, and I want to say that we are doing something that has to be done for the radio station, for the program, and so on. But I want to be able to, and I do, to some extent, feel the person who is on the other side of that telephone. And that's a connection, that's a much deeper connection than anything that we are saying, right?
Yeah, that is a mysterious fact about being as a person with other people, is that you do, and to go back to the 60s again, we talked about vibes, picking up people's vibrations, that kind of thing. That's obviously not a scientific term, but it describes something.
Well, wait a minute. I'm not ready to let go of the scientific of that. Right now we are talking about mirror neurons. There are areas of the brain that before we didn't even recognize, that we can now see on the MRIs. You know, it isn't so woo-woo crazy. I think it's a lot closer to being looked at and shared and amplified, because if we want world peace right now, could you imagine if we could get, you know, sometimes I think if I were, like the song goes, if I were a rich man, I would like to rearrange the seats in Congress so that people would sit according to their birthdays and they would make a zodiac. Could you imagine if you could give up for that time being, whether you are right or left, and just be an Aries or be a Leo or be an Aquarian? And then, if you look at the country from the perspective of the entire zodiac, could you imagine what that would be like and how we would have a different kind of politics? So that's what I mean by transpersonal sociology, to explore those areas in which we can become a matrix for spirit.
Well, you mentioned singing together. I just have to ask: does it have to be at 4 in the morning?
I tell you what, uh, there is something that happens when everybody else is asleep. You know, can you imagine how much fewer advertisements are going around in ether at that time?
You know, it is exhausting to live in a consumer society and try and retain some sense of the inherent values of
Yeah.
things. I sometimes think that even if you had no notion of God, you might want to go to church just because it's one place where they're not advertising anything to you.
That's right. So you see that what heavy filtration system we have set up for what comes from the outside. And everything is done in order to enhance and to protect the ego from the assault of all that advertisement and influx. Sure.
So you mentioned song, you mentioned poetry. Can you call to mind any favorite poems that speak to
You know what? They don't come so easy this way, because for me, that poetry is usually something of longing, and it's not poetry for me, but it is poetry that has a liturgical thing, like I'm addressing God. You who love my soul, compassion's gentle source, take my disposition and shape it to your will. Like a darting deer I will flee to you. You get that language?
Mm.
It's a whole other language, and it is in the I-thou mode.
The what mode?
I, thou, and
Yes.
thou, like Buber was speaking about the I-thou relationship. That is where I'm facing God. So that sacred poetry says that kind of thing. St. John of the Cross, wonderful stuff. In a dark night, I came to a place I know not where. How I got there, I don't know, but I was surprised, you know. So they're wonderful poems. Kabir, I translated some Indian Baul songs into Hebrew because I wanted people on our side to see what beautiful devotional material there exists.
When you speak of directly addressing God or confronting God, where do you look to do that?
Uh-huh. You know, there's a funny story about William James comes to a place in New England, and he asks the deacon there, what do you place yourself in front of when you pray? And he said, an oblong blur. And I can understand, because he doesn't want to have an image and so on. But in that relationship, it is heart and person. And that's where I come with a root metaphor in which I have invested love and caring. It's almost like saying how some people have it with an image and a picture, and some people have it with a thought form, or with the sacred letters of the divine name, which makes them present to that. But beyond that, there's a sense that, how would I put it, Christians like to talk about the Sacred Heart of Jesus, that there is a feeling that there is a caring being that I can face and to whom I can pour out who I am, what I need, and what I love, and how I long to be one with that. And in Judaism, we speak about that as the relationship of Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. I've set the Lord before me always.
There's maybe it's worth mentioning the concept of idolatry here. The presence of God is very, in some sense, ephemeral or evanescent, and can be sort of spoiled by being fixed too concretely. Is that? I'm fumbling around here, but am I?
That's what the theologians are talking about, right? But the theologians are, when they're theologians and thinking and talking, they're not on their knees praying. There's a different situation when I ask from the heart and I allow something in. When you talk about idolatry, I think the worst idolatry is the way in which we have the presentation of self. If I were to look at politicians and presidents and what have you, and they have been working so hard, and right now when there's all this election is coming out, look how they're working so hard to present themselves. I don't think there's a greater idolatry than that. And then all the energy goes into saying, this is who I am, this is what I represent, this is what I stand for, and so on and so forth. And behind that, there's a real person. And when that real person doesn't show up, then we have a big idol, and this idol goes around as being the nominee. Am I making sense to you?
Yes, yes, you are. It's a kind of an idolatry of vanity or narcissism.
That's right, and look how much energy gets put into that.
It's been only as I've started to get old, which has very few benefits, but it's only as I've gotten into my 50s that I've finally become reluctant to stop talking so much about myself. Just I think for a sense of delicacy about that same thing. Although
because it really isn't about us. It's about an aching planet that's begging to us to pay attention to help her heal. When I was with Dalai Lama, Bishop Tutu, and all these other wonderful big folks, I raised 4 questions. I said, what is the cosmology we need to have in order to be able to heal our planet? The second question, what are the ethics that derive from there? The third question, what are the spiritual means that we have to use in order that we can really live that ethic? And then to say, what are the theories behind that change that are necessary? I haven't found the questions yet, but, I'm sitting with them, with those questions, because when they come up and they're being dealt with, that our planet is aching. If I get into an empathy moment with our Mother, the Earth, and I want to feel, where does she feel good right now? Oh God, here's a flood, and here's a famine, and here's a fire, and here is a war. So I feel the pain of the planet at that point. And once we can pay attention to that, that's where our spirituality is. It's not about the infinite. It's about this planet right now. We are cells of a living organ, a living organism, Gaia, and she is hurting. And that, I think, is the most important thing.
And yet, Reb Zalman, do you still worship the one
of course.
God, the God of Abraham?
Yes, because you know what? That's my grandfather. If I have anything in my genes, there is a lot of learning and history that took place from the time of Abraham on. And that sense that here he was able to say to God, hey, you are the judge of the whole world. You aren't going to do justice? Are you going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? Here you have someone who really interacted with God for the benefit of the people. And so did Moses when he was saying, if you're going to destroy those people, look what's going to happen to your reputation. They'll say you took him out of Egypt and then dropped him in the desert to kill him. Shame on you. So this kind of relationship is not a surrender one, but it is one of covenantal sharing. It's almost like a marriage.
Let me ask you another one of those really big questions.
Okay.
What is prayer?
There are so many ways. You talk about prayer as if it was one thing. There is prayer when I'm in need of something, and then it comes from the Latin word precare, to beg. If I have a friend who is ill, and I want to send energy to that person, and I address, if I say it technically, I address the universe that is so full of energy, way back from that level that is a 0.0 field, to everything that's going on in nature, that some of that healing energy should go to my friend, and I beg for that, and I do this in human language. Please send energy and healing to so-and-so, okay? I think that's one level of prayer. There's another level of prayer, which is hallelujah, which is like saying, I don't want anything. I just think you're so great. Just, I dig you, God, Yay, yay, God. And that's the hallelujah stuff. And then there is another level of prayer that's much, much deeper, that has to do with living with the seasons. And depending on the season, if it is spring, to be able to go into a spring romance with God, and if it's fall, then to go into a fall romance with God. Look at the Easter season for Christians at this point, the high holiday season for Jews. That's when we are doing that particular dance with God. That's another kind of prayer. That's where liturgy comes in. And then there's still a deeper form in which I want to, like a drop, dissolve in the ocean, and for a nanosecond, be God and come out of that. That's a whole other level. So there are levels and levels and levels. And if you talk to people about the entire spiritual enterprise, you're going to find how many wonderful, subtle things there are. By the way, I want to mention that I wrote a book called Jewish with Feeling. That's the title that the publisher gave. I wanted to call it, if you're so universal, why be Jewish? The first chapter of that is called Oi, What a Word. And it deals with the word God, what we are talking about.
Thank you. I will. I'll actually look that up. I bet I can.
Okay.
Why do you think that that some people responding to the divine or the sacred choose death over life? And I'm thinking, of course, of some of the news headlines.
We're not talking about the business, about the shaheeds, about the martyrdom and so on.
Sure, but I mean, we could take. I mean, it's universal.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, are these properly understood as genuinely religious acts?
Oh, this is such a, I don't know whether we can do justice in a few minutes to that, but let me say this. There is a point where I so want the kingdom of God to happen. Let me translate it into other language. Let us imagine earth is healed. Let us imagine humanity is cooperating with each other. Let us imagine that every species of life we are in harmony with, And if someone were to say, will you give your life for that? I'm sure I would say yes. So when people talk about the messianic order or utopian order, the kingdom of God, these are the kinds of things that propel a person to say, my individual life is not worth as much as that. But look, we do this in smaller groups too, not only for the whole planet. If the life of my family was at stake and I could save their life by giving mine, I wouldn't hesitate either. So the question is, what do we declare to be more precious than our own life? And that's where a lot of that comes in. There's also a bad part of that, and that's the approval, figuring that if I give my life for this or for that, I will be honored by my people. And that brings back the idolatry of the presentation of self. Still,
what the picture you paint is very compelling, and also it's rather gloomy because each individual sees the world his own way, and what you've said, it seems to me, just makes it harder to draw the line. It's not good. It's not enough to say, we can't say violence is always wrong, or religion prescribes all violence, or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out that even our most exalted motivations can have just as mixed and sometimes frightening issue.
Yep. And so that's why I'm saying that we are bound to go through a crisis. People are talking about 2012 to 2016, the Aztec calendar and so on and so forth. We are moving to a crisis place where the possibility of sustaining human life on this planet is going to get very, very close to not being. and there's bound to be a flip around, which we are already beginning to do, but we don't recognize it. You see, the news that always gets picked up about the tragic and catastrophal things that are happening, but so many good things, from the microloans to the way in which people help each other. Look at what happened during the time of the tsunami, how soon we ran to help the people there. And so there is something underneath that's happening where people are acting locally and thinking globally, but it doesn't hit the news yet the same way. Paul Hawkins writes about this beautifully.
Let me. I'm sorry. My ideal of an interview is one where each question flows into the next.
Talk a little bit louder. I'm a little hard of hearing.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My ideal of an interview is one in which every question flows naturally into the next, sort of like a very animated dinner party conversation. But in reality, I find I have to jump around a little, and I'm going to make another jump here.
I really don't mind. Go ahead. we are both are at the service of the program that should happen.
Thank you so much. Does it seem to you that science and religion have an uneasy relationship just now?
I would want to say had. I want to say had. I want to say that this is in the past. Once I really go to the quantum universe and I understand energy medicine, and I understand non-local phenomena, and I understand even how placebos work and why they work, and I go to the God neurons that people are looking at under the MRI, I don't think we are that far away. It's only when people are saying by religion they mean a kind of fundamentalist reading of Bible or whatever their sacred scriptures are with the worldview in which they were created, then I think that takes a time travel back to another era. But if we are current with religion, in other words, with the God stuff that we are really connected with, never mind the books, and then we go back to the books and we can make stuff come out from the books that's different. But when you go back to where scientism was, and science was only what you can touch and see and measure, then of course we were dealing with something that says, spirit, I can't understand that. But we are now in a much more harmonious possibility.
But suppose the biologists studying the human being were able to completely explain the evolution, the psychology, and the neurophysiology of the religious impulse. In that case, wouldn't that reduce the religious feelings that you spoke of earlier, that affect and those intuitions? Wouldn't that reduce that really to just the status of a dream? It's captivating.
You're exactly right. No, they won't even call it dream, When Freud was talking about the oceanic feeling that we want to go back into the womb, that was very reductive, He was always saying, what is the origin of things? But if I go with Teilhard de Chardin, I ask the question, what's the teleology of this? To what end does it try and lead us? Take a look where we were with Cro-Magnon first, the first human beings, Homo sapiens, and we get to where we are today, and we see there has been an evolution. But the question is, it points to somewhere. And I think it's not only that we are being pushed from the past, we are attracted to the future. And this is what science can't do at this point. Visionaries can do it, but scientists can't do it. They can only go by the rearview mirror. But if you are starting to drive toward that unknown future, then there is something else that guides you.
So what you spoke of in the past as, in quotes, inside, isn't really just inside, it's in the world too. It's this sense of purpose or destination or teleology.
Yeah,
it's something you can see, in a sense, in quotes.
Well, you can envision, see is too much objective, right? But if I go to the place where I say, I want to home in on to that guiding radar thing that says, I took care of you in the past and I will take you into the future, and I want to make you into, how would I say, a salvational being. It's a whole other thing. And I can give myself to that. And then, of course, the topology of inside outside is just a language convenience. That's all.
There was a time not too many years ago when all the sociological and scientific thinkers about religion were predicting an age of secularism. That does not seem to have come into being.
Well, you know what? I wouldn't mind. The Dalai Lama is such a wonderful human being, so compassionate and caring. And he says that I would like, he says, that people would go by a secular ethic. In other words, what works to keep society become better. You know, I'm not against secular. Secular means that which is happening at this time and this place. And when we make sacred separate from secular, then it doesn't work. But if in holistic, secular and sacred are just one thing that has to do with enhancing life and consciousness and love.
Is the sacred then something real, or is it something in some sense subjective and detached from
I'm
reality?
hearing behind you when you say subjective, merely subjective.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. Is it real, or is it merely subjective?
And I want to say subjective isn't a merely. You know, as long as I say that I'm hooked on to what's happening outside of me, which I can touch, that's objective. But the I am that I am, which is the deepest thing inside and which hooks me closest to the cosmic I am, that is the subjective of the subjective. There's only one subject in the universe, and that's God's I am. And the closer I can get to that, that's fine. But when you say merely subjective, then you go into the reductive area, and I don't want to go there. I don't think it works there. If I go to the subject of the subject, which is, look, my body will die, and the subject of the subject will not. So is that merely? That's not a merely. And look at what happened with near-death experience, with out-of-body experiences and so on. So the body is no longer in the picture. But people have a certain kind of I amness, a subjective. They can't be seen on the outside, but when they come back into their body, they report, I was floating over the operating table and I saw all the things that was happening there. So subjective isn't a put down. You know, it has to be resurrected to understand that that's the most precious part of us, that we are subjective.
You know, as a philosophy student, many years ago in my youth, I remember one of the little thought experiments that we were encouraged to undertake, which was to imagine the universe without ourselves in it. And there's something, in a strange sense, unimaginable about that. It's not a strictly logical contradiction, but if you think about it long enough, you get this strange sense that my subjectivity, my inwardness, my point of view, it can't vanish in some way. And then you utter that sentence to yourself, and the intuition is gone. But there is that strange, every now and then you get the strange intimation. Do you ever share that? Can you put that into?
Of course, you know, when we say the Shema Yisrael as Jews, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, Hear, O Israel, the Lord of God, the Lord is one, and you go into that one, and you sort of focus into the one as the bullseye of the moment of your awareness. And there is that moment you dissolve. You don't stay there very long, because once you get to the consciousness, I dissolved, and you're right outside of it again. But we do have an imprint of that. And I think this, look how many people have had so many theophanies in the world, but they disappear so quickly, you know, they evaporate. And so you need to have like a photographic plate when you get the snapshot that you would then later on develop and fix it. look at the wonderful moment of the axial age. You had Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Isaiah, Zarathustra, Mahavira, Buddha, Lao Tzu, and Confucius about the same time in the world. So what was happening? They got it, and everybody else got it, but they kept it, and the others didn't keep it. So there was something about that momentary imprint of being beyond oneself, from which they were able to develop a whole series of guidelines of how to use consciousness, how to use the sacred, how to use ethics and morals, etc.
Reb Zalman, why is God so remote? Why is the divine so ephemeral, so fleeting, so difficult to grasp?
I tell you what, I join you with that. Not as so much as a question, as a prayer. I want to say, why are you hiding? You know, why are you not? You see how much we are in trouble. If you could come and manifest a little bit more, if every day we could have 10 nanoseconds of a zap that would realign us to the purpose of the universe, I wonder, why do you hide, you know? I agree with you. It's not for me so much a philosophical question as it is a prayer of desperation.
Well, so there are certainly a lot of different religions in the world.
Yeah.
Why? Why are there so many and so different?
You know what? I like to say that every religion, in a post-triumphalist understanding, you know, triumphalist means that most people would say, when the Messiah will come, all the Goyim will find out they're wrong, or when the second coming will be, the Jews will find out that they didn't listen the first time, or the Mahdi is going to come and show that those who didn't surrender to Allah, you know, etc., etc. That's triumphalist. We are now in a post-triumphalist universe, and if you have bought into the Gaian hypothesis to see that the world is alive and is one, that's a whole different story. Now, then the question is, why different religions? And I would say, wouldn't it be stupid if I wanted my entire body to be made from liver? Because every religion is like a vital organ of the planet, just as like every species is needed. So therefore, we need some religions that are going to be doing heart work, and some that will do kidney work, and some will do brain work. I'm just giving this as a model, you know? So we need them all. Could you imagine if we were to collaborate with each other, and a lot of the mind work that Buddhism gives us, and a lot of the devotional stuff that we get in Judaism and Christianity, and a lot of that sense of surrendering to the power greater than us that comes from Islam, and a recognition of divinity all over the place in different forms that comes from Hinduism. You know, what a wonderful thing this would be if it were to be organically harmonious.
And yet the situation we have today is one in which the liver and the kidneys seem to be in battle with each other to determine which is the truer organ.
Yeah. Did you ever hear of something that's called body talk? The body talk system?
No.
Well, there is something around like this. How do you heal people? Most of the time, because the organs of the body are not in good communication with each other. So this guy found out that if you could really, and you can do this with kinesiology and with other means, to find out the body is wiser than the ideas, the head about it. So you ask the body, what part is not connected and do you need to connect at this point? And the people who do this body talk work are doing wonderful healing things. If you can look them up on the body talk system on the computer, on the internet.
I'm making a note.
What I'm trying to say is, it's the same situation. There are some people, you know, when I sit with Father Keating, and we have conversation, when I talk to Abdulaziz, a Muslim, or when I talk to Buddhists or Hindus and so on and so forth. It's just wonderful. We have these great holy conversations in spiritual intimacy. It doesn't mean that the rank and file is there yet, you know? But when we do that, it becomes very, very clear that we have lots to share and give with each other. And that's what I call the dialogue of devoutness.
So
that is a dialogue that doesn't divide, that connects more.
So I guess it would be fair to say that you belong to the camp that believes that there is more than one way.
Yes. Yes, that gets a full yes, a chuckle yes. And when I start looking at all those wonderful ways, I like to say that each one of us is a pixel in the great picture. So I need to be a blue pixel, you can be a red pixel, but we all are part of that great mosaic of life.
If only we could figure out where to stand so that we could see the picture.
Yes. You see, this is where there's that reflection that comes from a certain kind of deep meditation.
Well, Reb Zalman, I'm pretty much out of questions, but you see the tenor of my inquiry. I wonder if you have anything that you'd like to add, perhaps.
Yeah,
to set
I would
me
like
straight.
to say to people, ask your experience and not ask your superego. You know, don't ask the limits that you've gotten from that threatening thing. Take a look. Where is that wonderful Roshi pulled my beard and he says, where is your beard when you're shitting? You know, so he was trying to take me back to the primary experience. I want to say, where are you at the time when you feel alone and you really, really are saying, I might want to go into a dream state in which I can dream the holy daydream of my purpose on earth. I think that's one of the things. And if you can get enough people together to say that we are going to do and share our dreaming, that's wonderful. Then there are some ways that I call and developed as a tool, which I call socialized meditation. And if you have a moment, I'll do some with you, okay?
Okay.
All right. I will say a half a sentence, and you finish it. And you will say then the next half a sentence, and I'll finish it, and we'll talk back and forth, and we don't know what the other one is going to say. Ready?
Uh-oh. All right.
Okay. The purpose of this interview is?
To understand the nature of religious experience.
Now you start the next sentence.
The problem of religious experience is?
There's a lot of debris that comes from conceptuals that we had from before. One of the ways of putting them aside is?
I don't know.
Okay, but do you see what happens now? We are sort of under the gun because we only have a few minutes left and so on and so forth. But could you imagine what this would be like if we had a day in which we could try various things that would be, how do we commune in silence? How do we commune in dancing to a special kind of music? How do we commune when we are listening to Gregorian chant and want to float with this? How do we commune? You know, and if it takes time. Yeah. And most of the sense is that very many of the religious disciplines demand a lot of time. And I've been working to try and make sure that people can do like Maharishi tried to teach people. 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening. I don't have more time than that. If you have a spirituality that takes more time, find another customer.
Reb Zalman, before I stop the tape, I want to ask you this. Do you have any favorite religion jokes?
Yes. It's the one about the monk who sits in the basement of the scriptorium and he's crying. And the abbot comes by and he says, "What are you crying?" He says, "It says celebrate, not celibate."
Reb Zalman, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Hey, John, it's a pleasure. Give me a call later on when you're putting the stuff together so we can just really chat off the record, okay?
Sure, that'd be great. I'm going to stop the tape now.